She gave him a bowl of soup, and in return, he brought 200 warriors to her father's doorstep. That's how it began. Not with a battle, not with a scream, but with a quiet act of mercy. Eleanor Sterling had grown up surrounded by silk curtains, crystal chandeliers, and the cold weight of her father's power. She knew how to ride, how to curtsy, how to obey, but nothing in her life prepared her for the sight that met her in the courtyard that morning. A man barely breathing lay slumped near the fountain. His skin was dark, streaked with blood. His clothes, though torn, were decorated in beads and leather marks of the native tribes her father loathed. Every instinct told her to walk away, to call the ranch hands, to let this stranger die quietly. Instead, she brought him soup. She knelt in the dust and held out the bowl without a word. And when he drank, something shifted in his eyes, something human beneath the pain. When he gave the bowl back, he said only this: "You don't know what you've done." By nightfall, she understood. From the distant hills, 200 warriors rode toward the Sterling estate, not to steal, not to trade, but to answer for the blood spilled by her family's hand. And all because she chose kindness over silence. She wasn't supposed to be in the courtyard that morning. The help did the walking. The animals had their own attendants. Eleanor Sterling had grown up in a house where comfort wasn't a gift, it was an expectation. But on that day, something pulled her from her room. Maybe it was the weight of the silence, or maybe it was the scent of dust in the morning air reminding her that somewhere beyond those white columns and polished floors, life still fought to exist. She saw him lying there beside the fountain, curled in on himself like a wounded animal. His chest rose in uneven gasps. Blood stained the front of his torn leather shirt. A trail of it darker than oil led from the outer fence to where he now lay unmoving, barely alive. He was one of them. That thought came uninvited, like an echo of her father's voice. Savages, raiders, vermin, the names her family had spoken at dinner tables lined with fine silverware. The names whispered by ranch hands after a bottle too many. But as Eleanor stepped closer, that voice faded. His face, though battered, held something quiet. Not menace, not hatred, but pain, human pain. She could have turned back. Should have, maybe. Instead, she went to the kitchen. The cook didn't even ask why she was ladling broth into a wooden bowl. No one questioned the Sterling girl. That was the benefit of being born behind high walls. No one asked, and no one really saw you. When she returned, she knelt in the dust, something her mother would have scolded her for, and offered him the soup. His eyes opened, just barely, and when he saw her, he didn't flinch. He drank. The way people drink when they haven't felt warmth in their chest for days. When he finished, his hand trembled as he passed the bowl back. And then, with a voice as ragged as the wind through dry branches, he whispered, "You don't know what you've done." She didn't understand. Not then. But something in the way he said it, not angry, not even grateful, just certain, made her breath catch. He struggled to his feet. Every movement slow and broken, but with purpose. He looked at her one last time. "They will come," he said. "Because of what you've shown me. They will come." By the time Eleanor turned toward the sound of galloping hooves later that day, part of her already knew. The act of kindness she thought had passed unnoticed had in truth been seen more clearly than anything she had ever done in her life. And now, it would cost everything. Because sometimes the softest act, the smallest mercy can awaken something too long, buried beneath years of silence and blood. And in Eleanor's case, it meant looking into the face of her own legacy and asking for the first time, "What have I inherited?" The Sterling estate was beautiful if you didn't know what it stood on. From the outside, it was the picture of triumph. Tall white columns, sprawling courtyards, imported marble from the East Coast. Every window reflected sunlight, as if the house itself had been blessed. Inside, there were oil paintings of ships Eleanor's ancestors never sailed on chandeliers that had hung longer than some towns had existed, and a grand piano no one ever played. But for Eleanor, it had always felt cold, not in temperature, but in soul. She'd grown up walking halls that echoed louder than they should have. She'd eaten dinners at long tables where conversation felt more like theater than family. And she'd learned slowly, silently, that love in the Sterling house came with a cost obedience. Her father, Richard Sterling, didn't need to raise his voice. The weight of his silence was punishment enough. He'd built everything with grit, fear, and the kind of money that came from knowing which lives were considered expendable. He was a man who measured success in acres claimed and names erased, and Eleanor was his only child. For years she had tried to be what he wanted, graceful, proud, untouchable. She wore the dresses, learned the languages, smiled when guests praised her upbringing. But underneath all that silk and polish lived a growing ache, one she didn't yet have words for. Just a feeling that her life was resting on something broken. She remembered being 12 when she first heard a ranch hand mention the river. "The bones still wash up, you know," he'd muttered, not realizing she was listening. Some of them small, real small. When she asked her father about it, his face darkened. They were trespassers, he said. That land wasn't theirs to claim. She didn't ask again. But the weight remained. The paintings on the walls began to look different. The silence during dinners grew heavier, and that river, the one her father now claimed as part of his property, began to whisper in her dreams. She hadn't been there the day it happened, the day his men were sent to clear out a native encampment by the water. But she remembered the change in the house afterward, the sudden tension, the ranch hands that didn't return, the newspapers that vanished from the front parlor before she could read them. No one ever spoke of it, but the quiet knew. And so did she. So when she knelt that morning to offer soup to a dying man, something inside her shifted, not because she had rebelled, but because for the first time she had chosen not to inherit the silence. Her act wasn't loud, but it was seen by the man she saved, and by 200 others who carried memory like a torch passed hand to hand. They were coming now, not just for revenge, but to remind her family that the past does not stay buried. His name was Toma. To the ranchers, that name meant nothing, just another ghost from the plains. But to those who had lived in the winter camps by the river, to the children who had once run between the lodge poles, laughing under moonlight, that name had meaning. Toma was not the oldest son, not the strongest. He was the one who stayed behind to tend the fire when the others went hunting. He was the one who knew the names of the plants that healed and the songs that put babies to sleep. He was the one his sister trusted with her secrets, and the one who taught his little cousin to carve animals from pine bark. And then one winter morning, he came back to silence. Not the kind that holds peace, the kind that follows fire. The tents were ash. The smoke still clung to the trees, and where there had been warmth, color, life, there was only stillness, cold, dry, and final. He found his sister near the riverbank, a string of beads still wrapped around her small hand. She had been working on a necklace for her doll. It was never finished, and he buried her with it. They said it was an accident, that the hired men were meant to scare them off, not kill, that the women must have fought back, that the children were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Toma had seen the footprints. He had seen where the horses circled, where the fires were lit, not to warm, but to burn. And when he asked who gave the order, one name rose again and again, Sterling. That name, too, carried weight, not just for its money or its cattle, but for what it stood for. Power without consequence, land without memory, empire without shame. And so for 3 months, Toma waited. He listened. He gathered the ones who still had strength to ride, whose eyes still burned with the need to remember. But he didn't seek revenge. He sought a moment when the man who gave the order would no longer be a shadow behind a desk, but a name with a face standing in the open. That moment came, not with a weapon, but with a bowl of soup. And it wasn't from the man himself. It was from his daughter, a girl who knelt in the dirt and gave without asking what tribe, what name, what side. It was mercy. And it cracked something open in Toma that had been sealed shut by grief. Not enough to forget, but maybe just enough to choose something other than fire. Still, not all wounds heal the same way, and not all warriors agree on what justice should look like. Because when 200 riders answer one man's call, not all of them come to forgive. It began with a sound, not loud, not violent, just distant, like thunder rolling low across dry land. A murmur too steady to be storm, too alive to be wind. Eleanor heard it before anyone else. She was standing by the front window, hands still dusted from tending the stranger, now gone. The empty bowl sat on the mantel like a quiet secret. Her father was in the stables shouting about missing tools. The help moved like clockwork, unaware that something was coming for all of them. And then the sound grew. Not one horse, not 5, but dozens, then more. Dust rose on the far hills like a curtain lifting. Shapes emerged, first silhouettes, then riders. 200 of them, painted in red, white, black streaks across faces hardened by loss. They rode in silence. No drums, no banners, just the weight of memory in every hoofbeat. The estate, once proud and polished, seemed suddenly small beneath the approaching storm. Richard Sterling stepped onto the porch just in time to see them fan out. They moved like tidewater, slow, steady, unstoppable. Forming a half-moon around the house, horses shifting restlessly beneath them, as if the ground itself could feel the tension in their bones. Eleanor didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her father's eyes scanned the riders, and he paled. He wasn't a man who believed in reckoning. He believed in fences, in hired men, in legal ownership, and cold negotiations. But this wasn't business. This was history, and it had come to collect. One rider broke formation. Tall, wounded, steady. He dismounted slowly and walked forward, spear in hand, the way a man walks into a place he's seen before, but only in dreams. Or nightmares. It was Toma. Eleanor felt the breath leave her body, not from fear, but from the quiet realization that everything, every conversation, every rule, every story she had been raised on, had led to this moment. The mansion her father built with his ambition. The walls they thought would keep the past out. None of it mattered now. Because there are things that cannot be bought or buried. There are names carved in blood and smoke that return when the wind changes. And sometimes the ones we try hardest to forget remember us the most. Toma raised his voice not in anger, but in clarity. He called her father's name. And the earth felt still. The porch, the fields, the wide Wyoming sky, all held their breath, because this was no longer about cattle or borders or even vengeance. This was about something older, something heavier. A silence fell across the land, the kind that comes before the first word is spoken, the kind that says, "Now we speak the truth." Toma stood alone at the edge of the marble steps, his voice calm, his spear grounded like a truth he refused to let go. "Richard Sterling," he said, "you know why we have come." The old man didn't answer. His hand hovered near his pistol, more out of habit than intent. Even he knew no bullet could quiet what stood before him. The riders behind Toma remained still. 200 of them, each carrying the weight of someone lost. A mother, a brother, a child. Their presence wasn't a threat. It was a question, a demand for meaning, for acknowledgement, for something the courts would never offer, the truth told out loud. Eleanor watched from beside her father. Her heart beat with a different rhythm now. Not fear exactly, something heavier. Like she was standing on the edge of a river, knowing that once she crossed, there'd be no going back. Toma's eyes found hers for just a moment, and then he said the words that changed everything. "Your daughter showed me mercy. She gave me food when I was dying, and because of that, I offer a choice." He looked back at Sterling. "You can face the judgment of our people. Now, here, for what was done by your command." He paused. "Or..." His gaze returned to Eleanor. "She can come with us. Not as a prisoner, not as payment, but as a witness, a student, a bridge. She will live among the people you tried to erase, learn our ways, and carry our truth back into your world." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was alive, thick with disbelief, with tension, with hearts caught between justice and sacrifice. Richard scoffed. "You want to take my daughter?" Toma shook his head gently. "I want her to see, to understand what was lost, and what still can be saved." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. And if I say yes, then your father lives? For now. And perhaps someday the next generation won't carry the same hatred? The old man's hand fell away from his pistol. No, he muttered, I won't let you throw your life away for my sins. She turned to him, her voice steadier now. Then maybe it's time someone in this family did something worth remembering. For a moment neither moved. And then, almost imperceptibly, Richard Sterling seemed to shrink, as if the years, the choices, the buried names had finally caught up with him. No one cheered. No one moved. Because the choice was not an ending. It was a beginning. Toma didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached slowly into the small leather pouch at his belt and pulled something out. Something light, delicate, almost unnoticeable in his weathered hands. It was a necklace. A loop of thin sinew strung with small bones and faded beads, child-sized, lovingly crafted. It caught the morning light in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch. This, Toma said softly, belonged to my sister. He stepped forward, not as a warrior now, but as a brother. As a man, carrying the weight of something far older than vengeance. She was 8, he continued. She had clever hands, a laugh that sounded like bird song. She made this necklace for her doll, while our mother stirred soup on the fire. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. She was still holding it when I found her body. The men you hired, Mr. Sterling. They didn't give her time to scream. Richard Sterling stood frozen. He had faced outlaws, rivals, and revolts, but he had never stood before a truth this small and this devastating. I buried her by the river, Toma said. And I promised her I would carry this until I found the man who made it happen. He looked directly at the old rancher. And now, I want you to wear it. Gasps rose from the surrounding riders. Even Eleanor flinched not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of what that necklace had come to represent. Sterling shook his head, lips pale. You want to humiliate me? No, Toma replied. I want you to remember. I want you to feel these bones on your skin when you wake, when you eat, when you touch everything this land gave you. He held the necklace out. Because every acre you claimed, every coin you made was built on bones just like hers. The silence was thick. Not accusatory, but ancient. The kind of silence that made even the strongest man realize he was standing on ground, soaked with memory. With shaking hands, Richard Sterling took the necklace. It felt lighter than he imagined, and yet heavier than anything he had ever carried. He slipped it over his head. The bones lay against his chest like a quiet verdict. Eleanor watched her father, in that moment the proud figure she had once feared, once followed. And for the first time in her life, he looked human, not powerful, not monstrous, just a man, and one who finally knew the price of what he'd built. No one spoke. Even the horses were still. Then Toma said gently, now you wear her memory, and now you live with it. But memory, no matter how heavy, is not the end. Because just as the necklace settled against one man's chest, another sound reached the valley, distant, urgent, growing louder with every heartbeat. The necklace still hung against Richard Sterling's chest when the sound broke through. Not the steady rhythm of warriors waiting in judgment, not the silence of reckoning, but something else. Galloping hooves, fast, urgent, wild, every head turned as a lone rider tore across the eastern ridge, dust trailing behind him like smoke from a rising fire. He was young, barely more than a boy, with the same high cheekbones and sharp eyes as Toma. His horse was foaming at the mouth, lathered from the brutal pace. When he reached the circle of warriors, he nearly fell from the saddle, breathless and frantic. The boy didn't speak English, but he didn't need to. The way he pointed north, hands, trembling voice, cracking in their native tongue, was enough. Eleanor didn't understand the words, but she felt the weight in the way Toma's expression changed, from stillness to horror. What is it? She asked quietly. Toma didn't answer right away. He stood listening, his jaw tightening with every word. Then slowly he turned toward Eleanor and her father. His voice was lower now, steadier, but it held something brittle underneath. There's been another attack, he said. 20 miles north. A settlement. My people. Eleanor's heart sank. Your warriors? No, Toma replied. Our children, our elders, our sick, they were in the winter camps. Soldiers came, not hired men, government men. He didn't shout, he didn't curse. He just stared into the distance as if he could already see the smoke rising. They wore uniforms, carried flags, said they came to clear the land. Just like before. The boy spoke again, more desperately this time. Toma closed his eyes. My brother was there, he whispered. His wife's family lived in that camp. He stayed behind to help them prepare for winter. He looked down at his hands, now balled into fists. They found him holding the children. They shot him. 17 times. The air went still again, but it wasn't the same stillness as before. This one burned. It cracked at the edges like wood about to splinter under heat. Some of the riders began to stir. One turned his horse toward the north. Another followed. Eleanor saw the shift in their faces. The judgment they came for, the justice they believed in, was now clashing with something even more urgent: survival. Toma didn't try to stop them. He just watched, because he knew some fires don't wait for permission to spread. He turned back to Richard, to Eleanor, to the mansion behind them, suddenly dwarfed by what was rising beyond its gates. I came here for truth, he said. But now, my people need more than truth. Eleanor swallowed hard. Then go. Toma studied her face. There was no doubt in his eyes, only pain. I will go, he said. But this moment is not over. It will wait. But it will not vanish, because justice delayed is not justice denied. But sometimes, the chance to delay it is all we're given. The wind picked up again, whispering through the cottonwoods that lined the estate. It carried with na, muy bui muy mau ho, padiusidas so sa hun su comte quelai. Most of the warriors had already turned north, answering the call of their people. But a few still remained silent, motionless, holding space for the choice yet to be made. Toma stood at the edge of the steps, the weight of 2 worlds pressed against his chest. He looked at Eleanor with eyes that held more than exhaustion. They held the ache of history. You gave me mercy, he said quietly. And because of that, I gave your father time. He paused, then turned to Richard Sterling. But that time will not last forever. The old man stood beneath the porch light, the necklace of bones still resting against his fine cotton shirt. His shoulders slumped under its weight. Not from pain, from understanding. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the richest man in the valley. He was simply a man being asked to carry the memory of a child he'd never met and yet had helped bury. Richard spoke slowly, carefully, like someone testing the sound of their own voice after years of using it only to command. I'll wear it, he said, touching the necklace gently. Every day. I'll feel every breath through these bones. Toma nodded, not in forgiveness, but in recognition. And what will you do with what you now know? He asked. I'll speak it, Richard answered. Out loud. Even when it shames me, especially when it does. He turned to Eleanor. And I'll start by not stopping you, if you still wish to go with them. She didn't answer right away. Her hand found her chest just over her heart, as if trying to steady something inside. Then, with a quiet breath, she stepped forward. I do. The few remaining warriors stirred, surprised. One of them began to protest, but Toma lifted his hand, silencing him. She chooses to learn, he said. And that is a rare kind of courage. Eleanor looked at her father. His face was pale but calm. You'll be alone, she said. He nodded. For a while. But not forever. Not if I do this right. No goodbyes, no tears, only a long look between father and daughter that said what neither could find words for. We both carry it now. Toma offered her a hand. She took it. And together, they stepped down from the porch, away from the marble, the chandeliers, the legacy built on silence, toward something uncertain, but real, toward truth. Because some reckonings come with fire, but others come with footsteps, quietly walking away from everything you've ever known. The dust settled slowly. Long after the hoofbeats had faded into the horizon, after the wind had carried away the last whispers of judgment, the Sterling estate stood in a silence unlike any it had ever known. It wasn't the hush of wealth or power. It was the quiet that follows awakening, that sacred stillness after the storm. Richard Sterling remained on the porch long after Eleanor and Toma had disappeared from view. He didn't speak, didn't move. Only his hand, trembling but steady, rested over the necklace of bones against his chest. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't sleep in the master bedroom. He sat instead by the cold hearth in the study, staring at the painting of his grandfather that hung above the fireplace. The man who had first claimed the land, first drawn the maps, first driven the fences deep into the earth. And he whispered to the silence, "We were wrong." In the weeks that followed, change came slowly, but it came. The ranch hands noticed first. The guns lining the wall of the great room quietly disappeared. The armed patrols around the property were dismissed. The locked cabinet of land deeds was opened and burned. He sold the cattle. He sold the silver. But he kept the house, not to preserve his name, but to rebuild its meaning. Where once there had been rooms for guests who never came, there were now classrooms for children of all kinds. Children who spoke in English and Lakota. Children who learned side by side, where no one asked who owned what, only who needed help. In Eleanor's name, the girl who had once knelt in the dust with a bowl of soup was carved into the cornerstone of the school. Years later, visitors would come, some seeking answers, others seeking hope. One of them was Toma. Older now, slower, but still proud, still watching. He would sit in the shade near the apple trees and listen to the children laugh. Sometimes he would speak to them not about war, but about the land, about the river, about a necklace once made by a little girl with clever hands and a dream. He never called Richard his friend, but he came back. And that in the language of grief was more than forgiveness. It was memory transformed, because empire may begin with violence, but legacy, that is a choice. And sometimes the smallest act, a hand reaching out a bowl offered with no demand, becomes the seed of something larger than any of us. Something that lives long after the last rider has gone. The Sterling mansion still stands. Not as a symbol of conquest, not as a monument to a name carved into cattle brands and land titles, but as a quiet place where children learn to speak the truth, even when it trembles in their mouths. And if you walk its halls today, you'll find no statues, no oil portraits of men with rifles and ledgers, only photographs of hands holding pencils, of elders teaching songs, of a girl kneeling in the dust, her silk dress stained with earth and her heart wide open. Eleanor never returned to the world she left. She chose instead to walk paths few from her side of the line had ever dared. She learned the language, carried water, listened more than she spoke. She did not erase her name, but she rebuilt its meaning, one shared harvest, one opened book, one kind act at a time. And Richard, he wore the necklace until his final day. Even when his hands grew too frail to hold a pen, they never stopped reaching for the bones at his chest, as if to remind himself and anyone watching that the past doesn't vanish just because we stop looking at it. It echoes, in dust, in silence, in stories passed down not to glorify, but to remember. Because what happened on that land and what followed is not just a tale of the Old West. It is a mirror of what happens when power goes unchecked, of what healing might look like when it begins with truth instead of pride, and of how the simplest acts, a bowl of soup, a word spoken with care, a refusal to look away, can reshape the world we leave behind. So if this story stirred something in you, hold it. Don't rush past it. Ask yourself, whose bones are buried beneath the comfort we call normal? And what would it take to live in a way that honors the ones we were never taught to see? Because mercy is not weakness. It is the beginning of justice. And kindness, even when quiet, especially when quiet echoes the longest. If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe. We tell tales that dig deep, that hold a mirror to history and to the heart, and remind us who we are and who we could be. And if you're ready for another unforgettable story, one with a twist you won't see coming, click the video on the screen now. It's about a dying gunslinger, a child in a coffin, and a truth buried deeper than any grave. Go ahead, let the next echo find you. We'll be waiting.